Hello and welcome to the AccelerateHER podcast. I'm your host, Elizabeth Pirrie, and as CEO of AccelerateHER, I have got the best job in the world. Throughout this podcast, we're going to hear from some of the incredible female founders that we work with. We'll hear their highs, their lows, and we'll revel in their achievements. We'll cover topics like raising investment, getting a product to market, growing a team, and we'll hear from the people in the ecosystem who have supported them. We're going to hear from amazing founders like Kate Cameron, Danae Shell, and the people who've worked with them like Evelyn McDonald. If this is your first time engaging with AccelerateHER, well, that's a great place to start. But look out for us on social media. You'll find us on Instagram and LinkedIn to see what other events we're running across Scotland. Come along and join us, be part of a vibrant network and part of the family. Now, sit back, relax, and happy listening. On today's episode, as I continue my mission to amplify the growth, backing and visibility of female founders, I am delighted to be joined by a wonderful woman from Tennessee whose legal tech startup, Valla, is going to disrupt the legal sector. While sitting as an advisory board member for the Law Society of Scotland and a member of the Employment Tribunal's National User Group to be able to get that inside track as well, this lady is passionate about AI and using it to make life easier. She is the epitome of proof that female founders do get investment. Welcome, Danae Shell. I am so looking forward to hearing your story. Let's start at the beginning. And I don't think I've heard this part of your story before. Mm-hmm. When you were at school, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Powerful.
Oh.
I mean, I had lots of different iterations of that, but generally, if you think about so I grew up in East Tennessee, which is like rural Appalachia. So for context, like my mum didn't have access to indoor plumbing until she was like in university. So like mountain people. And, it was a beautiful place to grow up, but you started on the back foot immediately and nobody really left. That wasn't really for you, if that made sense. But I didn't really like that. And so I knew when I was a little girl that I just wanted to, I guess, be more. And I thought president, I thought astronaut, I thought all kinds of different things. But more than anything, I just knew that I wanted to be more and have more than kind of what was immediately in front of me.
Wow, I love that ambition.
Started early.
Absolutely, and just kept going.
Yeah.
So where did you go from there? From Tennessee, where did your journey take you?
So when I went to university in South Carolina, which feels like a pretty small step, but for where I'm from, it was a pretty big one. And then did a internship in Scotland as part of my political science degree. And by that point, I was doing political science and computer science and really interested in what they called e-government at the time. And there was an e-government centre in Edinburgh. And so I managed to blag myself onto an internship while I was doing my university degree. And after finishing that, I went back to do my final year of university and then called them up and was like, can I come back and can I have a job? And so we arranged it so that I could come back and do my master's whilst working at the International Teledemocracy Centre, as it was called at the time.
Ooh.
I know. It was so funny. Back in the day, we didn't know what to call digital things, so we called them all kinds of things.
And so, often if people go to work for government, they stay with government for forever.
Yeah, that was where I was. I was in academia because it was part of Napier, or Edinburgh Napier, as it's called. And I did love academia. Like I really enjoyed it. It's so clear in school in general, and higher academia is clear to know how you're doing well. Like there's a real clear path that you can follow, and it was fun to kind of follow that path. But then I got pinched away because one of the guys that I had worked with, he went to work for this. Again, it wasn't called a fintech at the time because it was too early, but it was a fintech company, only about 6 people. And he poached me away to go and work as a Flash developer at this financial planning software company that worked within an actuarial company. And so that was really my on-ramp into the Scottish tech scene.
Okay. Flash developer, is that like you see with Adobe?
Yeah,
Flash.
Adobe Flash back in the day. So before Web 2.0, Adobe Flash was like the way that you could build really interactive systems. So yeah, again, showing my age.
And then, so that was your step into the startup world then? Yeah.
Yeah, that was the first startup. So that startup was about 6 people. It then got bought into its parent company, and then that company got bought. And then I went to free agent and kind of moved on from there. So yeah, I've been through loads of acquisitions, an IPO, quite a few different rounds. So got lots of experience in the kind of 15 years that I've worked in tech.
Yeah. And somewhere weaved in amongst that story, you had a knicker blog.
Yeah. So it was so interesting. Like, so this was when I was at Napier, still working there before I moved on to the fintech company. And this was just as blogging became a thing. And as part of my work there, I was building a blogging platform for community councils. This was before you could just get these things out of the box, before WordPress was a thing or anything like that. And people had just started to do what they called pro blogging, which was blog for advertising revenue. And I thought it was fascinating that you could make money on the internet. And I got really interested in this idea of lingerie, because women weren't really able to go on the internet at the time and talk to each other about lingerie without it being like just filled with creepy stuff. Like, it was gross. And I was really interested in this idea of bra sizing and women's confidence. And so started publishing this blog called Knickers, which at the time, like for 5 years, if you Googled the word knickers, you found my blog. It was the top of the thing. I went to all the trade shows and taught the lingerie industry what a blog was. And then by the end of Knickers, when it kind of phased out, they were all calling me like, oh, Knickers, I had this huge database and newsletter of people. I had this kind of online platform, but I wasn't really interested in turning it into like a proper media company, which was where the industry was going. And so I was like, nah, I think I've learned what I need to learn from this and moved on.
And I see a little theme that I've seen recurring in your life where you were, teaching the industry how to write blogs. You always strike me as someone who learns something and then's like, I want to share that knowledge with the world.
Totally.
And I love that about you. So you're at free agent.
Yeah.
Was that when you started to see an opportunity for Valla? Is that what led to that, or?
Not originally. I think so. I was a free agent for about 6 years, and the free agent was fantastic because they were so transparent about how they ran and grew that business that they basically trained a whole cohort of founders without really even realizing it. I think they just knew that the transparency would help us do our jobs better, but we got exposed to so much of the inner workings of how startups are built, how they're funded, all that kind of stuff. And so there was like this, it was a really interesting time that I was there. There was a whole cohort of us who were kind of middle management at the time who all graduated at the same time, and we all hit the glass ceiling of, well, there's already a very capable executive team running this company. And we were all like, we think we could probably do this now, or we want to have our shot. And so a lot of us kind of graduated out into our own startups. I knew I wanted to run a startup before I knew that that startup was going to be Valla, and started working on building a startup even before I knew what it was going to be, because I knew I needed to build my own profile to get funding, to be able to credibly pitch, to get investment and things like that. So even before I knew what the startup was, I started working on my online presence, my public speaking, networking, and things like that.
That's quite fascinating because a lot of the women I meet have seen a problem and developed a solution and then suddenly found themselves with a business. Whereas you you didn't take that route, you almost did it the other way around, and that's fascinating. And yet you weren't surrounded by entrepreneurship at home as you grew up? Or?
My dad ran a construction and landscaping company, but that was about it. So I definitely saw what it was like to run a business, but it was in a very different market.
I was going to say, I don't know that life in construction would inspire you to go into build a disruptive tech startup.
No, not really. It did inspire me to not have to work in landscaping and construction.
Fair enough.
Yeah, teenager as a laborer in my dad's landscaping and construction business taught me that I wanted to work at a desk.
So then how did you go about finding that problem that you wanted to solve?
It kind of found me. So by that point, I had left Free Agent, and so I saw this amazing talk from a woman called Maria Gutierrez, who at the time was at Free Agent as their VP of Engineering. She then went on to be VP of Engineering at Twitter and a few other places. She's amazing. And she talked about this very deliberate career path that she followed as well, where she knew what she wanted before she knew how she was going to do it. And so she had these checklists, like, I need to get this kind of experience. I need to work at this kind of company. And so I had formed my own one of those and was kind of working through it. And Kate Ho, who I had worked with at Free Agent, she and I had worked together really well there. And we kind of always knew we wanted to do something together. And so we were bouncing around all these ideas. And they all kind of were in this similar space. The first idea was maybe a startup around the immigration space. So Kate and I were both senior women in tech, and we had seen a lot of problems at work, both ourselves and a lot of people coming to us for support. And to be honest, it really just pissed us off. We couldn't understand why people couldn't do anything about it. And then you could see the parallels between, the work that I had done in the fintech with financial advisors and then in the accounting space with accountants. Basically, the first hypothesis of Valla was, well, if you can build software that lets someone file their own tax return from their phone, surely you can build software that helps people run their own legal case if they can't afford to do it the traditional route. So yeah, that's kind of how the idea emerged. And it's not natural because, as you can hear, there's no legal part of my background.
Yeah.
But the problem was so clear and so acute that it was like, yeah, this feels like this is the one to kind of run after.
Yeah. No legal background, but now you sit in the advisory board for the Law Society of Scotland. That's pretty impressive, Danae.
You learn a lot about stuff when you build a product about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that build has always fascinated me. And you're a founder that I quote often when I'm talking to other founders when they're looking to build their minimum viable product. I always like to remind them that M stands for minimum in MVP.
Yeah.
And you, I guess you could say you Wizard of Oz a bit before you started. So tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, I like to emphasize this to people as well, because both Kate and I came from a coding background. We could have built pretty much anything that we wanted to build to, go out and pitch and raise investment, but we very deliberately did not write any code at the beginning because we knew that the biggest problem that early on in a startup isn't, can I build it? Unless you're really in like super deep tech or life science. It's not about that. It's about, does the market want it? And so we ended up building the very first product that we built. We were still in kind of a B2B space, was a projection of injury to feelings claims, which was this very specific type of claim in employment law. And it was a spreadsheet. Like, it was literally just a spreadsheet in the background, and then we used Google Data Studio to build like a little interface over the top of it. But it was just data entry into a spreadsheet and then drag and drop. It would be 10 times easier now with all the tools available, even than 5 years ago. And that was what we showed to law firms. And we had one law firm who said, yeah, I would be willing to pay for this. And that is what we used to raise our pre-seed round, was that MVP, a spreadsheet, and one person saying, yes, I'd be willing to buy this.
Wow. So off of the back of one person saying you were able to raise.
Yeah, I needed to show a pipeline. I needed to show massive market opportunity. I needed to show a massive problem. But it's all about the story that you're telling, and you just need enough traction to show that it's possible. Like, it doesn't so much. I remember there was a certain point where I thought, am I going to be ready to run a company? Like, there's, especially for women, it's always, am I ready? Am I ready? A little bit more, then I'll be ready, then I'll be ready. And then a few things happened in my career where I was like, why am I holding myself back? All these other people, they're nowhere near as considered about this, and they're doing it. So why am I waiting? And so now I've kind of flipped that, and it's like, I'll let somebody else tell me if I'm not ready, but I'm just going to keep going until I get pushback. And that's a really good example of that. It's like, yeah, well, let's just see if this is enough. Let's find out. Let's go tell the story and see who wants to hear it.
Yeah. And so Valla now is you sort of almost pivoted, I guess, not quite pivot, but expanded, I guess, from that initial very niche problem. And tell us now what Valla does, in case anybody listening doesn't know.
Of course, yeah. So Valla is now a B2C product, and we support people to run their own legal journey from the very first point where they start to think, is is that okay? Can they do that? All the way through to raising that as an issue at work. We're starting with employment law, and then all the way through to tribunal if it gets that far. And so we have a platform that allows them to keep track of what's going on, generate documents, and then we also have top-up coaching with legal professionals to kind of hold their hand and guide them through the process.
And lots of customers.
Yeah, so we've supported over 12,000 cases so far, I believe, and that's about 2.5 years. And that grew loads since I think it was about last year where we really started to grow quite a bit more. We now have about 20 coaches that we're working with, the legal professionals, and we're a core team of 8 and adding to that team this year.
Brilliant. I mean, good for you. I'm devastated to hear that many people are having that sort of problem in employment, but delighted that they've got you in their corner.
Yeah, there was a big gap left behind by 2 things. One was the cuts to legal aid over the last couple of decades, and the other one is the increasing lack of affordability of basically anything. So, increasing inflation and people's wages not going with it means that about 90% of UK consumers can't afford a traditional legal service now for anything beyond maybe like a 1-hour call or something like that.
Yeah. That's quite a depressing thought.
It is. It is. It's one of these things. I hope maybe after Valla we can help solve this problem and then move on to something else.
Yeah.
It'd be nice for it to not have to exist anymore eventually.
Yeah, absolutely. If anyone's going to fix it, you are, Danae. That's for sure. That's probably a good place to pause, actually. We have a section on the podcast that we're calling Ask Accelerate Her. And we work with lots of founders, so we hear from lots of them with lots of questions. So we ask them to email in with questions for the experienced founders that we're going to be chatting to in this podcast. So our question today is, how do you know when it's time to pivot rather than stay on a path that isn't working?
Yeah. So this was where we were immediately after closing our pre-seed round. So I had just gone out and convinced these investors that this B2B proposition was the one, and that law firms were going to give us money, and that was the way that we were going forward. And then in between that and actually going through the legals and everything else, Kate and I started to realize the market's just not pulling us. And that it was Kate who, she put the brakes on. And that makes a lot of sense because I had a lot less experience at that point in product, and Kate was a product professional. She ended up moving on from the company, but I'm so glad she was there for that formative stage because she was like, I'm not seeing what we need to be seeing here. And now I understand completely what she didn't see because now I've seen what market pull looks like when you can't give them what they need fast enough and they can't be happier with it, even if it's kind of rubbish. But at the time, the law firms, they were kind of like, yeah, this is nice. Yeah, I'll be happy to look at it, but nobody was like, shut up and take my money.
Yeah.
And I think that's when you've got a red flag and you need to think about pivoting, because there is nothing that makes running a startup harder than trying to push a market. Sometimes you do have to do market education, but if you're using market education as almost like an excuse for a lack of pull, you need to think again.
Yeah, I was going to say it must be quite difficult for someone who is, you think, well, people just need to understand that this is the problem. And when do you give up? When do you say, well, it's not working?
Yeah.
How do you know to do that?
I think so positioning is really interesting. There's a lot of, if I build it, they will come, that, happens. Falling in love with the solution is probably the most dangerous thing that you can do as a founder. Falling in love with the problem and staying in love with the problem and not actually being very attached to the solution is probably one of the smartest things that we've done all the way through. Even our name, Valla, I knew that it was going to be in the legal space. I knew that there was this kind of this support aspect to it. I called it Valla. There's like this valor idea. There's like this values-based law kind of thing in it. But I deliberately named it Valla because I knew that we would pivot along the way, and I didn't know what the product was going to end up being.
Yeah.
So I needed like a Zoopla style name
Yeah.
that could accommodate whatever we became. And that is the way to think about early stage, because it doesn't matter what you think the solution is, you will be wrong.
Yeah.
You'll be right about the problem most of the time, but the solution, the market, as soon as you go out there, the market will just humble you time and time again. So yeah, if you're finding yourself stubbornly holding on to the solution, instead of stubbornly holding on to the problem and exploring lots of different positionings, lots of different ways of executing on that solution, then you're in danger.
Yeah. I heard a man describe it last week as if your customers wouldn't notice when your company dies.
Oh yeah, that's a great way of putting it.
Yeah.
And there's a the net promoter score that people use a lot. There's an alternative to that, whereas the question is, how upset would you be if this product was removed tomorrow? And that's another really good way. If all of your customers are like 5s and 6s, then you don't have market pull yet. And it might be that it's a positioning shift. It doesn't have to be a full pivot. We had to pivot. The way that we decided what to pivot into is we kind of took a big step back and we understood the problem, but we really mapped out all the different players in the problem space. So the law firms, the consumers, the courts, the government. And then we thought, okay, where can we add the most value with the skills that we have coming from places like Free Agent? And then started going in there and testing that. But you do have to decouple in that way to kind of get there.
Yeah. So it sounds like staying in love with the problem, not the solution, is certainly the way to go in that, to sort of condense that down to the answer. If you've got a question for Accelerate Her, then email podcast@accelerateher.co.uk and I'll pose it to one of our future guests. Back to you, Danae, and back to Valla. I'd like to talk to you a wee bit more about that raise, because we hear so much, at 2% of institutional investment, most female founders, women have to do 4 rounds, was it 5 rounds to raise the same as men. You've raised more than once.
Yeah.
Do you think you were held back as a woman?
Of course, yes.
Yeah.
Definitely. But it's funny, you have to be like, to do this job, you have to think that you're going to buck the trends anyway. And then to be a woman doing this job, I think you have to be extra stubborn, or I don't know, sometimes I say I'm megalomaniacal about it, because it's like, yeah, you have to believe that not only are you the 1% of companies, especially for venture capital funding, which is the type of funding I've raised, there's only about 1% of companies that even fit the venture capital model. But then within that, I have to believe that I'm the 2% of that is an all-female team getting that funding.
Yeah.
And if you don't believe it, it won't happen.
Yeah.
But I think that preparation that I did before I even knew what Valla was going to be really helped me. That was really just fundamental networking, professional development, making sure that I had a name and a reputation in the market that I was in. And I remember one of the big things that I wanted to achieve was I wanted to speak at Turing Fest, which is a really, really fantastic conference in tech. And Brian, the organizer, brings in world-class speakers. They're incredible. And I wanted to be on that stage, which meant that I had to be good enough at speaking and have something interesting enough to say to be on that stage. And so it took probably about 1.5 to 2 years of work and different, like, getting speaking experience elsewhere to build enough of a portfolio for him to even consider me. And then when I finally did get on the stage, and it was a talk that I took 6 months to prepare, to really think about what do I want to say here and how is it positioning me. But the person who eventually invested in me in my first round was in that audience. So it's, the best time to start preparing is yesterday, but the second best time is now.
Yeah.
Like, I cannot express enough how much it has helped me, even with crowdfunding, which I did later, the networking, the ability or the willingness to just self-promote, build a have an opinion on the internet in a professional way about things that I care about and to help other people, like with the education stuff that I do.
Yeah.
I think it really makes a difference.
Yeah. And I was at Turing Fest last year and you were running the stage.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really fun too. And that's a great networking tip, by the way, because if you host, that's easier in some ways. Sometimes it's harder. But say you just like, if you want to start out with that, you get a hosting gig, you get to meet all of the speakers that you're introducing. And you actually, one of those speakers that I introduced at Turing one year, she ended up investing in the company via the crowdfunding round. So again, networking doesn't have to be like standing in awkward rooms and shaking hands.
Yeah.
This is all networking.
Yeah. Because I'm often asked about networking and how do you do it. And one of our other questions that we used in another episode was, I'm an introvert. How do I get out there and network? And I think for women, it feels harder. You're often in a room surrounded by men if you go to a networking event,
Yeah.
in inverted commas. But you seem to have just mastered it.
Networking,
You make it seem easy, but is it?
I think so. Well, like, once you find the kind that works for you, to me, a lot of networking is helping people out. So you talked about how I like to, as soon as I learn something, I like to teach other people about it. To me, that's just part of networking. It doesn't really count. It doesn't look like networking, but it is networking, but it's just the way that it works for me. And I think for every person, there's very few people that awkward networking event format is the best way for them to network. But if you fundamentally think about it, it's just meeting people who are like-minded and being top of mind to them when an opportunity comes up that you would be a good fit for. And there's loads of ways to be top of mind. Knitting, education, speaking, book circles. There's all kinds of stuff. So you can find something that works for you.
Yeah. So from the outside looking in, and I've followed your story very closely over the years, as you know, not in a stalker kind of way though.
Never.
No, in that very much fangirling way. You've made the fundraising look really easy. You must have made mistakes along the way. Would you like to share any of them with us?
Oh, absolutely. Fundraising, it's in some ways it's a contact sport. The only way to learn it is by doing it. And the only way to do it is to do it badly until you start to do it better. The problem is that every interaction that you have with an investor is forming their impression of you. So it's a pretty high stakes way to learn. But oh man, yeah, it's I've probably had at this point hundreds of VC calls and investor calls across I've done 2.5, 3 rounds, depending on how you kind of cut it. And I think the first mistake that I made was not talking to people who actually were a good fit for the company and for me. Actually, the very first mistake that I made was not asking for enough money. And it was Brian who ran Turing Fest. He sat down with me really early in the stages of Valla and he said, "You're thinking about raising. How much are you thinking about raising?" And I said, "You know what? I think I only need about 50, 100,000, something like that." And he was like, "Stop. You didn't say that. I never heard you say that. Never say that again. Never say that to anyone." And I was like, oh. And he said, "You need at least 500,000. Do not tell anyone that number ever again, ever." And now I understand it, because if you think about what we're building, if I wanted to go out and build a bakery, I know everybody, banks, everybody knows exactly how much it's going to cost to set up a bakery with the equipment and the staff and all of that stuff, and then sell that product to customers, and they know roughly how many products they can sell to customers. That is a known business model.
Yeah.
When you set up an early stage startup, what you're essentially buying with that money is time. And you think, oh, well, my first solution, that's going to be the one that works and things like that. But you need at least 12, ideally 24 months of time in that raise for you to pivot, make those mistakes. And I was too afraid to ask for that much money. I was playing in the kiddie pool, and he immediately dragged me out of that and was just like, "No, if you're going to do this, you're going to do it seriously, and you need to be asking for enough money for you to actually iterate through this problem space and create a solution." So that was the first mistake.
How different do you think Valla would have been if you had gone out just for 100,000?
I think we would be dead. actually, is the right answer, because a lot of the market, I got really lucky. I was too early in some ways with Valla because nobody in the investment market understood the opportunity in legals in general. They just thought it was like a horrible market to enter. And especially when we moved into consumer legals, everybody was like, that's crazy. Nobody's going to buy this. It's going to be too expensive to recruit customers. Nobody wanted to fund it. But I was sure that if you changed the delivery model of legal services, you could make an affordable consumer product. And I was sure that technology could do it. And so I bought enough time, and then generative AI came along. And then suddenly everybody realized that you could change the delivery model to something that was actually affordable for consumers. And because we had stayed alive long enough, because we had raised long enough, we were in the perfect position to raise at exactly the right time as soon as that wave hit of the market suddenly understanding the opportunity. But if I hadn't kept us alive that long, we would have missed that wave and somebody else would have picked up that opportunity. So yeah, not raising enough, definitely the biggest first problem. And then talking to investors who just weren't a good fit. Like, you have to know what kind of business you're trying to build. I am building a company that has the potential, if all things go well, to be worth over £1 billion. In order to raise venture capital investment, I have to believe that that is possible and show a path for that to be possible. It doesn't have to mean, I can say, with a fair wind, it's possible, but I have to show that if these things line up correctly, that's where we can go. If you can't tell yourself that story and tell someone else that story, don't talk to venture capitalists. But if you can tell yourself that story and tell others that story, don't talk to funds that aren't at a venture capital level.
Yeah.
Because they'll have different priorities and it will be a mismatch with your company. So really understanding the different types of investors. Like, there are funds that look like venture capital funds but aren't. Angel syndicates differ massively into their appetite for this £1 billion of size versus a smaller size. So really understanding what their priorities are. Brad Feld's book Venture Deals is a really good place to start there, and that will help you kind of understand. But you have to know what you want from the company before you start thinking about investment. And I talked to a lot of people who were just a terrible fit. And the other mistake I made was I went to investors thinking that they were doing me a favor. Like, I am here to make them rich.
Yeah.
That's why investors invest.
Yeah.
And that is the story that they want you to tell them. They're not doing you a favor. And you are not a supplicant to them.
Yeah.
They have more power than you, but you are there to make them rich. And so you're doing them a favor.
Yeah.
Like, you are their ticket. You are the one that they want to put into their bio to say, I invested in this company early.
Yeah.
That is what you want to represent to them. That's the dynamic that you want to go into when you talk to an investor.
Yeah.
But that took me years to learn.
Yeah. Oh, but that's great. If this is the only thing you remember from this episode, please make it that just you're not doing them. No, they're not doing you a favor. Sorry, you're doing them one.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to talk about working in startups.
Yeah.
As well. I love that you stepped out of academia into working in startups. And now you've got a startup, and there's definitely a theory that startups breed startups. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely. That is 100% my experience. Yeah, I don't think I would be here if I hadn't worked at Free Agent. And I think the best way, if you're like me and you're like, I quite fancy building a startup, go work at a startup, because it's such an education. It's a very different type of business. You can't really learn how to build a startup working in a corporate job.
Yeah.
Even working with startups in a corporate job, it'll give you more exposure to it, but it's not quite the same. It's a very different business type. The uncertainty is phenomenally high. And as a result of that, the business works differently. You make decisions differently. The culture is different. And so actually being in the middle of it and kind of getting used to that is such a good way to learn, how do I react in these situations? What does good look like? All that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think because I was at Free Agent in particular, that is And like I said, a lot of us graduated. There's some really player data, fantastic wearables company doing so well. That's another free agent graduate. There's all kinds of really cool free agent graduate companies.
So this is something that makes me worry for Scotland a little bit, because it can be hard to raise finance in Scotland.
Yeah.
And if you go to the States to raise finance, they want you to set up a company in the States.
Yeah.
So these companies, great Scottish companies at the heart, end up out in the States. So they're employing people over there. So then those people are going to create startups, but not in Scotland. It's going to be in the States. And there is an argument that it's great that these companies go out and go forth and take over the world, but remember where you came from. But if you're not employing people where you came from, how do we build that startup culture in Scotland?
Totally. Yeah, it's so important. Like, if you think about the people that I talk to a lot, there are people who worked at FanDuel, Skyscanner, Free Agent, Current Health, the graduates, kind of like, and there's only there's probably like 5 or 6 that got to a scale and a size that then give the people the experience to then be able to go work at the next smaller version as their CMO, like I did when I moved from Free Agent. I went from a mid-level person and maybe a head of a department out to CMO level at a smaller startup. That's what you want. You want people to graduate into the smaller ones and then build those up and then graduate again. But yeah, you do have to have the work in the country for that to actually happen. And there's a lot of fantastic reasons to build the startup here in Scotland. But there was one investor in this last round that I did who flat out said, do you really think that you can build a £1 billion company in Scotland? Shouldn't you just move to Edinburgh? And I think it's why they didn't invest in the end. And they just didn't believe that it was possible. Whereas I'm like, I have to spend a lot of time in London. There's a lot of rooms I have to be in. But the culture here, and it's in a fantastic, supportive community, and there's much more we can do to help people kind of support each other. I think there's tons of reasons why this is the place to build a startup.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to seeing you achieve that, without a doubt. Danae, I could, as always, sit and talk to you all day.
Same.
But we do have to watch our time. There's an optimal length for a podcast, I'm told, so we have to be careful. So I'm going to switch it up to finish with our quick fire round of questions.
Nice.
And they have not been quick fire answers from anyone so far.
Okay.
So I'm not expecting that of you either. But let's start with the best piece of advice you ever ignored.
Ooh, the best piece of advice I ever ignored. People told me really early on about fundraising and to pick the right investors and to find the investors that match me. But I ignored them for the first 2 times I fundraised, and I kind of took a spray and pray approach. And I just talked to anybody who's willing to take a call, basically. And that was silly. And really, that didn't just waste my time, but made it harder for me to raise because the wrong people had an opinion about the company and were forming the wrong opinion about the company. So yeah, I definitely being more choosy about who I spoke to and focusing on quality instead of quantity. I ignored that, and it was fantastic advice.
Yeah, it's difficult though to do that, isn't it? It's so easy to just, if someone's interested in you, to talk to them.
Yeah.
And you forget that actually it's harder to get out of a relationship with an investor than it is to get out of a marriage.
Oh, yes.
Sorry, Andy, if you're listening. But it's, it has to be the right person. And there's lots of different boxes to tick for that to be the right person to invest in your business. So.
Yeah, just because they're willing to give you money or interested in giving you money does not mean that you should be talking to them. And it's almost like you have to, now I almost think of Valla, from an investment perspective, Valla's story as something that I need to protect and very like cultivate with the right people, not something that I just spread out to anyone who will listen.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's because I want to get into a marriage, a 10-year plus marriage with people who are going to be with me through thick and thin.
Yeah, absolutely. You do a fair bit of mentoring yourself.
Yeah.
But who would you dream of having as a mentor for the day? And this can be dead or alive, famous or not.
Oh my goodness. I'm trying to remember her name. The woman who ran the Georgia Senate campaign and eventually ran the whole campaign for the Democrats, Stacey Abrams. I would love to talk to that woman. She is incredible. She is a Black woman from Georgia who very nearly became its governor and basically won Georgia for the Democrats. And she has learned how to operate outside of traditional power circles in a way that I have seen very few people run so effectively. And I would love to speak to her and kind of understand even the day-to-day of how she does it. She's incredible.
I think that would be a really interesting day, you two together.
Oh, yeah.
I wouldn't mind being a fly in the wall. What's your guilty pleasure when you need to unwind? And do you know, I've been reflecting on this and I don't think we actually need to feel guilty about it. So what's your pleasure when you need to unwind?
So my husband and I remortgaged our house during the pandemic and bought a 7-acre woodland just south of Loch Lomond.
Oh, wow.
And we just recently found out, we knew it was a temperate rainforest, which is super rare, but we just recently found out that it also is a massive peat store, but it's covered in rhododendron. So it's under threat, and there's actually, in the whole woodland that we're a part of, there's over 500,000 cubic meters of peat underneath it. It's a huge amount of carbon stored underneath it, but it's all under threat from rhododendron. And so at the weekends, I chop rhododendron down. That's my stress relief. It's about the most analog alternative to my digital days that you can imagine. But sunshine, labor, like a bit of exercise, completely switched off, can't look at my phone, chainsaw. Yeah, completely different, and makes a big difference for my stress levels.
And I'm not sure how to follow that. I feel like I should just stop there. That was brilliant. What's the best book that you've read recently? And if you're not a reader, although I suspect you are, you can go for podcast or TV show or whatever. And it doesn't have to be business related.
What have I read recently? That The Spear Cuts Through the Water. Incredible book. And in fact, the same guy wrote another book. So The Spear Cuts Through the Water is almost like a kind of like a fantasy sci-fi kind of book. And the same author wrote another one called The Flightless Birds or something like that, which is more pure sci-fi. And that's more like a kind of like a near future dystopia that then moves very rapidly into the future. So I really enjoy science fiction in general. Probably the book that blew my mind and keeps blowing my mind is The Three-Body Problem, a Chinese sci-fi author. It's just like every time I think about that book, it just blows my mind again. So yeah, I really enjoy sci-fi.
Yeah. Have you ever read any sci-fi from the past and find yourself now, when you're working with AI and things, thinking, my goodness, I'm in that book now?
Totally, yeah. It's funny because I read a lot of Ursula K. Le Guin, and she was a sci-fi author in the 70s, and you can see a lot of what she talked about in the tech now. And yeah, it is, especially with AI, like this is definitely the next industrial revolution. Like this is the next big leap, and we are living through it. It's incredible.
Absolutely. I've kind of steered away from talking about AI because I feel like that could almost be an episode on its own.
Oh yeah, we could talk for ages about AI.
Yeah. So we won't disappear down that hole. Finally, describe your business journey in one word.
Grit.
Grit. Oh, I like that.
Yeah. It's. I think sometimes that being an entrepreneur, a successful entrepreneur, is just getting knocked down and then being willing to get back up again over and over, and having the self-awareness to know how to kind of navigate through it. But yeah, there's like, especially as a woman, it's tough. Like, it's good that I've made it look easy. That's what I'm trying to do in some ways, but it is super tough, and so much of it is just about staying alive as a business and staying in the game so that when the opportunity hits, you're there to grab it. And that's just grit.
Brilliant. I love the way you've topped and tailed this episode. You started with the word powerful and you finished it with grit. And I just think that's absolutely perfect and probably sums you up beautifully, Danae. Thank you so much for your time today. It has been a pleasure, as always. And thank you to you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this episode and stay tuned for the next one. Thanks for listening to me chat to another amazing female founder. I hope you enjoyed that. Of course, this podcast wouldn't have been possible without the backing and support of some amazing organisations. The Scottish Government, who funded this through their Pathways Fund, Barclays Bank for letting us record this in their amazing Glasgow campus, to Podplistic for seamlessly recording this and cutting out all of my bloopers, and of course to the guests for giving their time to come along and chat to me. If you want to hear more about AccelerateHER, please do follow us on LinkedIn and Instagram. Pop over to our website, accelerateher.co.uk, and sign up to our newsletter. I look forward to seeing you at an AccelerateHER event soon.